Bueno, aprovechamos mientras va llegando gente, cosa que no es verdad, porque están ahí todavía. Aprovechamos para reiterar que en el lobby del hotel, acá al lado donde se está desarrollando el coffee, está la urna para la elección, va a estar abierta desde las 10 de la mañana hasta las 4 de la tarde, según dice aquí en el programa. Pero bueno, es importante que cumplan con ese paso los asambleístas, los socios activos que eligen en la elección. Bien, como les decía antes del break, vamos a tener una pequeña alteración en el programa que tiene que ver con los resultados de la discusión anterior. La organización de la 74ª Asamblea me pidió que les diga entonces que vamos a escuchar ahora a Madhav Chinnappa, que es director de Relaciones Estratégicas con los Medios de Google. Él está basado en Londres, en el Reino Unido. Y después, a continuación, inmediatamente después, antes del almuerzo, que se va a retrasar 15 minutos, vamos a tener el panel sobre fake news, propuestas contra la desinformación, distintas estrategias para restaurar la credibilidad. Así que esa es la alteración que hemos hecho en el programa. No sé si ya las campanitas siguen sonando porque falta mucha gente. Only one. Okay. Pongamos ese video tan lindo que estábamos viendo recién. Sí, nos tomamos un minuto más hasta que llega la gente. Esperamos lo suficiente. Vamos entonces a invitar ahora sí a Madhav Chinnappa, que si no tengo mal el dato, es la persona que más horas viajó hasta Salta para estar acompañándonos hoy en la asamblea. Están traduciendo la pequeña morada, pero eso quiere decir que se gana un vino salteño, me dice acá la organización, ¿sí? Un Malbec salteño. Así que bueno, te invitamos, Madhav, por favor, a tu intervención. Reitero que Madhav es el director de Relaciones Estratégicas con los Medios y está basado en Londres. Por favor, de Google.
Thank you, Andres. And my flight was 26 hours, so if anybody can beat that, well, 26 hours from door to door to be specific. So if anybody can beat that, apparently you'll win them. There you go. Sorry. We needed to fact check that, so we have a winner. Thank you, Andres, and thank you, Sib, for asking me to speak at your conference. I'm honored to be here on the same stage that we had such a powerful discussion this morning. And as I said, I'm a little jet lagged, so I hope I'm a little not too boring. My name is Madhav, and I actually now have the crazy title of Director of News Ecosystem Development. So that's actually breaking news. It's so recent to the point that I haven't updated my LinkedIn profile, so it's a new job. But I thought it was nice to break some news at a conference about journalism. But I'm here to talk about how collaboration is what I believe is the present and future of the news industry, and how Google operates in the news ecosystem, and hopefully with many of you. As an aside, I use the word ecosystem specifically, as I believe gone are kind of the days, Gone are kind of the days of where newspapers just competed with newspapers and didn't care about TV or radio. I feel like everyone is competing with everyone these days for users' attention. And as far as I can tell, at least in London, it seems like things like Fortnite and Candy Crush and games like 2048, which don't play it, it's very addictive, are actually winning the attention battle. But a few words about me, if I may. I consider myself a news person at heart, as before joining Google, I spent 9 years at BBC News, and before that, I helped set up the TV arm of Associated Press in London. And so I was definitely blooded in the news industry and the news agency world. And it's fair to say that a hell of a lot has changed since I started. I started in the marketing department of Associated Press Television when APTV launched its TV arm in 1994. And I did everything I could to get into the newsroom, because that was where the action was at. And I ended up being Asian editor of APTV for a period that covered things like the Hong Kong handover and the Afghan Civil War, for those of you in the audience who are old enough to remember them. But the true reality was that things were fundamentally simpler back then. I'll give you a very small example. Satellites were so expensive and pretty much the only way of getting anything close to real-time information that if I bought a 10-minute satellite from Tokyo, I had used almost my entire daily budget, and it didn't leave much room for coverage. We now live in a fundamentally different world. It's so crazy that we now have participants of ongoing conflicts and wars that have media departments and social network accounts. And I believe this world is astonishingly exciting and challenging and scary and fulfilling at the same time. And for 8 years, I've worked at Google at the intersection of news and technology. And I need to be completely clear, I am the technically dumbest person at Google. I definitely see myself as a news person, not a techie. And therefore, sometimes I'll be frank, I feel like an outsider in my own company. But I think that's a really refreshing point of view. And I think that's why I got my newest job at Google, to work on all the collaborations that we do with the news ecosystem. But enough about me. I'd like to talk about what Google has been doing with the news ecosystem, and in particular, something that we call the Google News Initiative, or GNI. Sorry, we like our 3-letter acronyms, so I'll be saying GNI several times. But before I talk about what we're trying to do, I think it's important to explain why we are doing what we do, and why we care deeply about the news ecosystem. And you shouldn't take my word for it. I'm going to read you a quote from our CEO, Sundar Pichai. Sundar said, a number of years ago, "Google cares deeply about journalism. We believe deeply in spreading knowledge to make life better for everyone. It's at the heart of Google's mission. It's the mission of publishers and journalists. Simply put, our futures are tied." I hope this gives you a sense of why we care about journalism, as I suspect there might be a few cynics in a conference about news. This year, as some of you may know, we doubled down on our global cooperation efforts with the news industry and launched GNI, which is a project that commits $300 million for the next 3 years in initiatives that are aimed at building a stronger future for journalism. And GNI is designed to have 3 goals. The first one, elevating and strengthening quality journalism, which also means confronting and combating the spread of misinformation. And I know there's going to be a panel about things like that after this. And 2, evolving business models to drive sustainable growth. And that'll mean looking beyond ads into subscriptions and other things. Because actually, for me personally, I think that's one of the core elements that core challenges that we're facing in the news ecosystem today. And 3, empowering news organizations to make use of technological innovation, because the tech can really, really help journalism. When I'm asked about why Google is doing all these things, the short answer is that Google believes that news is important, and we have a positive role to play in the news ecosystem. The longer answer expands on the quote from Sundar. We share many of the same values as the news industry. Things like freedom of expression, access to information, the belief that an informed citizen makes for a better society. And we're committed to news from a values perspective. But there are also 2 self-interested business reasons for us to care as well. First, as Sundar said, we believe our successes are tied together. And I'd like to go a little deeper on what I mean by that. We're a child of the open web, so it's in our interest to have a healthy open web ecosystem. And please note, I didn't say free web, I said open web, there's a difference that we very much appreciate. A great search engine by its nature depends on the open web and on access to high-quality information. But it's also important to note that news is not monetized in our core news search engine, nor in Google News. But we do realize the importance for users to be able to discover quality journalism and quality information and news organizations and journalists that they may not have been aware of before. So it's in our business interests that news organizations thrive in the digital age. And this benefits the news organizations as well. We can quantify this. Last year, globally, we drove over 10 billion clicks a month to publishers' news sites. And we know these clicks have value, as I'm sure your audiences teams or your SEO teams have told you. This is important ways to help news organizations. But the true reality is that while digital has been fantastic for audiences, I can't think of a news organization that doesn't have a larger audience now than it had in a pre-digital world. And by the way, please feel free to fact check me if that's not true. I'd love to know. But it's been extremely difficult from a business model perspective. So there's also a second important business reason for us to care. There's been a meme going around for a little while about how all the ad revenues are going to Google and Facebook. And I must be honest with you, when I heard that, I was actually very troubled because I'm a news guy, and I'm not an ads person. So I looked into this because, you know, as I said, my background was at the BBC and Associated Press. And it turns out that it's a bit of a myth, and here's why. As most of you probably know, and I didn't, to be honest with you, before I joined Google, I actually had to do my research. Google's main source of revenue comes from search advertising. This is when you type something like digital camera and get a set of results, including ads, for places that you can buy digital camera. There's another part of our business that comes from ad technology. And this is the part of the business that's most relevant to news publishers. Because in this area, the core part of digital advertising for news publishers, we are a supplier. And let me be specific about what we mean by that. Our ad technology business is based on a revenue share model. And we have a monetization team of over 60 people in the region that work with many of the media outlets you all work for to help increase your revenues that they generate through some of our products like AdSense and AdX. Now, what that actually means to a non-ads person like me is that when you see an ad on a partner's website where our ad technology helps either source the advertiser or display the advertising, we take a small share of those ads. Our revenue shares start from 70% going to the publisher, and in many cases, much, much, much more. So in essence, with this part of our business that Matti there runs, if you don't grow, we don't grow. And last year, we generated over $12 billion for all our publishing partners globally as part of this revenue share arrangements through our ad technologies. But it's also important to note our other businesses like YouTube and the Google Play Store also operate revenue share models with creators and app developers respectively. Because at our core, we are a business that grows with the ecosystems we operate in. And I think it's really important to understand that because that's different from the other technology companies. People seem to lump us in using the term platforms. And I think it's important that we get very specific if we're going to diagnose and deal with the important challenges that we're facing. So that's the why part. And when I step back and look at the global news ecosystem, I do actually see some hope with lots of news organizations experimenting and adapting. And at Google, we're trying to play our part in that too. It's kind of been an interesting 8 years at Google for me, I have to admit. The story I tell about how I got my job is that while I was at the BBC, I used to interact randomly with people from Google. And I used to always say kind of two things. Number one, you don't get news, Google. And number two, whenever you try, you always do it with the Washington Post and the New York Times. Why don't you try and do it with some other people? And after a while, someone at Google called me up and he said, hey, you know all those things you're complaining about? We're hiring someone to work on them. Are you interested? So then, after what felt like 600 interviews, and by the way, the Google interview process is a challenge. I got the job as the first news products partnerships person in Europe. And at that time, we didn't have many products around news. Yes, we had our ad technology products, as I mentioned, where we help publishers power their advertising. But the only other product we had was Google News. And it's fair to say in Europe, Google News had a mixed reputation with news publishers. Many people loved it because of the traffic it sent them, but there was a more vocal minority that complained about it. So what did Google do back then? Nothing. That was before my time, I must admit. And so when I joined, I was always taught why is the most important and powerful question that you should ask. So when I joined, I asked myself, why didn't Google do anything when the product that was created to help the news industry was being attacked by powerful people in the news industry? It seemed crazy to me. And the answer was something that I'd heard from Google people when I'd complained to them when I was at the BBC. The response I generally got was, you need to understand we're an engineering company. And frankly, when I heard that, I thought it was, I'm trying to come up with a polite term for a word that's a swear word in my speech, so let's just say rubbish. I thought it was rubbish. But then I joined Google, and I realized what it actually meant. Engineering companies have very different cultures from news companies. Engineering companies are all based around products. And there's a belief that the products should speak for themselves. And thus Google back then really did not explain itself well, if at all. And I'll give you some concrete examples about this. After I joined, I would travel around Europe talking about Google News, talking about features like editor's picks and other things. And whenever I encountered someone that was skeptical about Google News, I would ask them two questions. Number one, do you know the origin of Google News? And number two, do you know how we monetize it? And it is amazing how many people thought we monetized Google News. We don't, we didn't, we haven't done. And the reason we haven't is actually based on how it was created. I'm not sure how many of you know how Google News was created, but if you know the story, please indulge me, because I think it's illustrative of some of the things that we're facing. And for those of you who know the story, feel free to check your email right now. Often people thought that Google News was Google's big plan to take over the news industry. The truth is, it was the opposite end of that. It was created by one Indian software engineer. I'm Indian and proud of that, so I always make that point. In his 20% time. This, if you don't know, is this magical thing that they allow engineers at Google where 20% of the time they can work on anything that they want. One day, I'll grow up to be an engineer. But Krishna created Google News due to his experience in the aftermath of 9/11. Krishna happened to be in New Orleans on that terrible day. They'd shut down all the flights back to California where he lived. So he went back to his hotel room, and he was trying to keep track of what was going on. He was a self-confessed news junkie. He turned on the television, and it was, you know, the loop of horror. And he went to his laptop to find out what was happening, because he was an internet guy. And he encountered two problems in 2001. Number one, finding news on the web in 2001 was difficult. And number two, going from site to site was almost even more difficult. And this spurred him to create Google News in his 20% time for himself. Because from the very beginning days of Google News through today, it's always been about making news more discoverable and driving traffic to publishers. People often call Google News an aggregator, but I don't think that's actually accurate, as most aggregators try to keep users on their site, while Google News is designed to send traffic. There's been some recent positive independent analysis by Chartbeat about the constructive impact of traffic from Google News. So we're hoping we're continuing to be relevant as a source of traffic to news throughout your region. I'm also told that Latin America is amongst the top regions globally in usage of the Google News app, apparently specifically around the World Cup, but that probably doesn't surprise you. But regarding Google News specifically, the best description I can come up with is that it's a news amplifier. But nobody calls it that, so it must be a terrible description. So I'm looking for better suggestions. If you have any better ideas how to describe what I think is quite a unique product, please let me know. I'm Madhav@google.com, or you can find me afterwards. But back to our story about what was going on in Europe. Google had already made a mistake by then. They were viewed with suspicion by a number of publishers. And honestly, I and many smarter people like me at Google have been working to demonstrate that Google was a positive part of the news ecosystem because of that culture clash from the very early days of Google. Another way I describe the culture clash, if I'm being cheeky, is that between the culture clash between news people and engineers is that engineers generally prefer the company of computers to humans, and some don't even like to talk to humans. And I hope this isn't being broadcast, but some of our engineers probably shouldn't talk to humans. Whereas news people thrive off talking to fellow people. But for me, the saddest part was what this culture clash and misunderstanding caused. It created an atmosphere in Europe, and it created an atmosphere in parts of Europe, and I must emphasize the parts bit, because Europe is relatively big and a very diverse continent, so it's very foolish to try and generalize. But it created an atmosphere in parts of Europe which made cooperation and mutual understanding difficult, and in some cases led to needless litigation and legislation. I won't go into too much details, but I would illustrate the unintended consequences and the damages that can arise from situations like this. You may have heard that in Spain a few years ago, they passed an ancillary copyright law that was targeted at news aggregators and created a structure that actually took the power out of the hands of the publisher by making what is known as an unwaivable right. Putting aside my earlier point that I don't see Google News as an aggregator, this removed the right from publishers. I, along with our Vice President for News, Richard Gingras, spoke to many people in Spain in the run-up to the law, publishers, politicians, civil servants, trying to explain that this law wasn't going to help publishers, what Google News was trying to do, and moreover, that we would have to shut down Google News in Spain as we didn't monetize it, and it was all about traffic for publishers. The law passed, and much to my personal sadness, we had to shut down Google News in Spain. And then what happened? And this is the sad part of the story. The traffic to news publishers decreased. Now, the big ones ended up with some single-digit percentages, which is painful enough. But for me, the truly tragic situation was what happened to small and local publishers. They lost much more than anyone else, because they're always in the fight for discovery with the big brands. I spoke to a publisher in Spain, a local publisher, who'd lost more than 30% of their traffic. And so this thing that was trying to help the news industry in Spain actually ended up hurting diversity and variety of the Spanish news ecosystem. Don't take my word for it. This has been sadly backed up by a number of independent studies. You can Google it or Bing it. You can find the information. It's out there. But this experience led me to believe, more than ever before, that the future of news is around collaboration and innovation, not legislation. And we at Google needed to get our act together in a much more coherent way than ever before. We've always collaborated with the news industry, but generally in a very fragmented way, with an array of random products trying to help, whether it's search with traffic or news with discovery and traffic, YouTube with video, or ad tech tools. But that fragmented approach was really not very well understood by the news ecosystem. And it broke my heart that these misunderstandings led to litigation and legislation that, as I said, in Spain, ended up hurting. But the other thing was the opportunity cost. I worked on, sadly, that project where we put a lot of work from multiple teams at Google, from engineering to product to legal to comms and partnerships, into doing something that sadly hurt the Spanish news ecosystem. I just want to harness all those resources into doing something that's positive for the ecosystem. And I think we need to collaborate to do that. Therefore, about 3 years ago, I helped create something called the Digital News Initiative, DNI. Again, apologies for the acronyms. And earlier this year, we announced its global successor, the Google News Initiative, GNI. The GNI brings together everything that we're trying to do as a company across products, partnerships, and programs. And it's designed to help build a stronger and more sustainable future for journalism. So, you will probably ask me, okay, fine, enough acronyms. What actually is it, and how does it work? Well, we're trying to execute against the 3 goals that I mentioned across our 3 pillars that I said. The first is product. And this is all about product development and the product development process and how we collaborate with the news industry. The first example of this is an open source initiative called Accelerated Mobile Pages, or AMP. And it aims to make the mobile web faster for users and keep control with publishers. And AMP actually came from a dialogue over 3 years ago that started with publishers saying to us that mobile was complicated. Users were flocking to it, but monetization and technology was difficult. And at the time, the problem that was also identified was that many of the technology companies were approaching news publishers and saying, give us a feed of your content, we'll host it, we'll do some different business terms. They were all different formats, all different business terms, everything from Facebook Instant Articles to Apple News to Snapchat Discover. including Google Play Newsstand at the time. So the plea was, Google, can you help? So our engineers looked at this, and they diagnosed that the problem was that the mobile web was too slow. Once they realized that was the problem, they knew that Google couldn't solve that this was an ecosystem issue, and that we needed to work as an ecosystem to try and do that. And that's why we helped develop it as an open source initiative, not owned by anyone and developed by the community. And I think it's been a bit of a success by any metric. I work for Google, we like our numbers, so I'm going to now barrage you with a list of numbers. We've seen 6.6 billion AMP documents from 56 million domains. There are up to 55 million documents per week in 104 different languages. On GitHub, which is where the AMP project is managed and built, there have been over 10,000 developers who have engaged with the project, with over 7,000 code submissions. And over 650 unique contributors have shared code, documentation, and samples with the AMP project. And critically, this has had a positive monetization impact for publishers that have implemented this fully, leveraging the more than the 100 ad tech platforms that support AMP through increased click-through rates, increased viewability, and increased CPMs. Publishers like La Repubblica in Peru have seen mobile page speeds cut in half with AMP. There's a lot more to be done with AMP, and we're doing that as a community for the betterment of publishers, the ecosystem, and users. Another example of an issue that was presented to us under the product development pillar was around video. And it is important, but commercially quite strong, but again, technically complicated. So therefore, we developed the YouTube Player for Publishers program, where news publishers can use the YouTube Player as the main player on their website, and also on YouTube, of course. They benefit from all the technical expertise of YouTube, the reduced costs, because you don't have to pay for streaming and ongoing development. And by the way, those reduced costs can be reinvested into other businesses, as well as better business terms to benefit from the audience development on YouTube and on your own sites. And to give you a concrete example, El Tiempo in Colombia worked with our partnerships and YouTube teams and successfully implemented YouTube as their video player on their properties, and that's grown their audiences on their own sites and on YouTube as well. Again, that magical thing that we all aim for, the win-win situation. And the most recent thing that we've done under the G&I product pillar is all our work around trying to make subscriptions easier for publishers and for users. This is a program we call Subscribe with Google. For over a year, we've been working with around 60 publishers in our subscriptions working group, including some of the most important groups in Latin America, like La Nación in Perfil in Argentina, Reforma in Mexico, Globo, Folha, Estado, and by the way, I apologize for my pronunciation, in Brazil, to shape this product from the outset. Because it's aiming to provide a seamless sign-in and payment flow that makes it easy for readers to use their Google account and payment methods to subscribe across the web, eliminating the needs for making account registration, memorizing passwords, and new credit card information. Again, trying to take friction out of the system and getting the revenue from the users to the publishers. The second big pillar of GNI is partnerships. And as I said at the beginning of my speech, I believe that collaboration is the foundational element to building a sustainable news ecosystem that we all want. We partner with news publishers directly through business and experimentations to try to develop case studies that can benefit the whole industry. Some examples from your region. Grupo Expansión saw an increase of 81% in click-through rates on mobile and twice as much on desktop, boosting viewability when they viewability by 25% and 36% respectively, using the Google Ad Manager and native ads. Our work with the digital premium Brazilian news consortium, which I will not try to pronounce, where Google is the platform partner for their exchange, aggregates their premium inventory from dozens of Brazilian publishers into one bundle that can be targeted and purchased across the Google Ad Exchange. Our support of new web standards has contributed to the success for publishers, as happened at the InfoBuy, which has more than doubled the time spent on mobile with their progressive web app, PWA. We've also made strides in working with news publishers on analytics and business intelligence as well. News Consumer Insights is a new product designed for news organizations to help them understand and optimize monetization for their audiences. I'm told we'll have some case studies from Latin America after that, so if you don't, please talk to Matti in the audience and say, where are those case studies? But we also partner with associations and the industry overall. I'll only give you 2 quick examples because I'm trying to bring back time for the organizers. We helped launch the First Draft Coalition to convene news organizations and technology companies to tackle the challenges around combating misinformation online. And with the Jigsaw division of Alphabet, we brought Project Shield, which is trying to eliminate DDoS attacks as a form of censorship to Latin America. With the help of CIP, we're now protecting 250 news sites in the Americas. And our final pillar is programs, which is basically just a catch-all for all the other things that we do in GNI. We couldn't come up with anything more creative than that. But this runs from everything that we do, from training that's done by amazing News Lab team, through to research and the insights that we do, either directly or via sponsorship. For example, I would highlight the work of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford and their annual digital news report. If you don't know about it, it's digitalnewsreport.org. It's a brilliant report. It looks at user behavior around the consumption of news in 36 countries. 4 are in this region: Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. We hope to expand that further as well. But I think it shows important insights about how user behavior is changing and the knock-on effects and the importance for news publishers. But this pillar also includes all the other work we do to simulate innovation. Things like the DNI Fund in Europe, but also more recent things like the Google Cloud program for news, which includes G Suite free credits. If you don't know what G Suite, these are our Google tools like Google Apps, Google Mail, Gmail, Google Sheets, other things like that, Google Docs. And you can apply for a program to get this free for 2 years for small and medium-sized publishers. But we're also expanding that to the Google Cloud Platform program, which puts in your hands the same powerful technologies that Google uses, until which you can apply for, until November 12th. So again, if you don't remember anything that I have said, please take a look at this program, which is open right now until the 12th of November. Have a look at the Google Cloud program. But we're also doing things with audio news as well to support media groups globally to build their audio capabilities as we see we see voice as a really big expansion and an important area for news. But again, one that is very challenging. But that's a list of all the things that we do. And I think that we do some. I think that we should actually do more. And the point about my job is not to sit here and list all the things that we do. I'd like you to know about them so you can take advantage of them. But the point about my new job is actually to listen to you, right? Embarrassingly, this is the first time that I've been to Latin America, so the 26-hour flight was very much worth it. But I'm not here as long enough. I should be here longer. So that's why I would like to hear from you either after the session, during the questions, and via email as well, and through our local teams who are fabulous. Because as a company, I think we need to learn and listen more, because we do want to collaborate. But I'd also like to close with a few quick points. If I've learned one thing while working at Google, it's kind of the power of the things that they talk about. And they talk about focus on the user and all else follows. And I think it's a really important thing to think about. The world in which we live in is very much the user's world. They have many more options, choices, and access to information than any other time in history. I have 2 daughters who are 10 and 16, and the world they're growing up in is fundamentally different from the world I grew up in. It's amazing and scary at the same time. But therefore, I think news organizations have now a much harder task than ever before to stay relevant to those audiences. And I do believe that there are certain things that news companies and media companies can learn from this technology culture about focusing on the user. And for news organizations, I think the reality is the world is just a harder place. But that's okay, because good things come from hard situations. And I'm not sure I have any of the answers for you, but perhaps it's not the answers that matter, but the processes that we put in place to get to the answers. Because there are no magic bullets to solve all the situation all at once. Trust me, if there is, tell me, we'll do it, right? But I think that we need to put processes in place where we find a series of different answers that help us all and help us continue towards making a sustainable future for journalism. And as I said, please do have a look at what we're doing under GNI. You can Google the Google News Initiative or Bing it. Other search engines are available. But GNI will attempt to collaborate and enable experimentation in all the areas if we can, to work towards the thing that I think we all have in common, which is a sustainable news ecosystem. Because I truly believe that working together, we can all contribute to that future that we all want. Thank you very much.
Bueno, tenemos tiempo, vamos a ver cuánto, para preguntas. No sé si están los micrófonos por ahí. Ahí. ¿Preguntas? ¿Comentarios? No me dejen así, por favor. Acá, empezamos por acá.
You have used some magical words, namely revenue sharing model. Could you elaborate on it? Because we all like to share a little bit.
Absolutely, happy to. And forgive me, the light's right in my eyes, so if I'm looking like that, it's because I'm getting blind, not because of the question. Yes, as I said, our ad technologies and a lot of the other things that we do, like YouTube and the Google Play Store, are built on revenue shares. So when our ad technologies are used on publishers' sites to show an ad or source that ad, the vast majority of the revenue from that ad goes to the publisher. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Hay tiempo, no te asustes. Acá, Alejandro. Hola.
Hola, buen día. Mi nombre es Alejandro Alfie. Yo soy periodista del diario Clarín.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
La pregunta va orientada a lo que sucede hoy día en los medios donde trabajamos los periodistas, que vemos permanentemente que se reducen los márgenes de rentabilidad de esos medios con el consecuente achicamiento de las redacciones. Y por otro lado vemos que empresas como Google o Facebook o YouTube, Twitter, usan los contenidos que producimos nosotros sin que esos beneficios vengan para los medios en los que trabajamos. Entonces, se nos produce como cierta contradicción entre ver que los medios en los que trabajamos son cada vez más chicos y menos rentables y las empresas como Google y estas que mencionaban son cada vez más poderosas y más rentables. Y me gustaría saber si hay algo más aparte de esta iniciativa que usted mencionaba en la cual los medios en los que trabajamos puedan beneficiarse y volver a tener la rentabilidad que tenían anteriormente.
Thank you for the question. And yes, I mean, I think that's the heart of the issue, is around the business model side of it. And again, as I said, it's really important to understand the roles of the different technology companies. They play different roles. And even within the company of Google, we have two big parts. We have our search engine. I would say three. We have our search engine, we have our ad tech technology, and we have YouTube. And so it's, again, important to understand what our role in this is. So as a search engine, our role is to send traffic. That's what we do. And that traffic has value because the traffic is eyeballs that everybody monetizes either through ads or through trying to get subscriptions. So that's the value that the search engine gives. And I've never met a publisher who said to me that they got too much traffic. So I do believe that there is that value there. That's why they have audiences and SEO teams to try to do that. But I think if you look at the other products from a Google perspective, and I'm not going to speak to the other technology companies, the ones that might begin with F. Again, as I said, the important point on that is that we operate on that revenue share model, as we do with the ad tech, as we do with YouTube. So we only make money when a publisher makes money, and that's really important, and that's why we want to see the industry thrive overall as well. There's a business interest in that. And that is a really important distinction, I would say, from some of the other technology companies that play different roles. And I'm not saying they're playing bad roles, but there are different roles. And so what we're trying to do under GNI, and one of those goals is to work on the business model side of it, is to figure out what are the other new business models in this world. Because the old world, the world that I grew up in for news, forgive me, that's the past. We need to look at the present and the future to figure out what those business models are. And so there are interesting things that are going around advertising and how you maximize advertising and optimizing, We're doing a lot of work around subscriptions. We also have a very interesting product which is a very small one, but I quite like it, called Google Consumer Surveys, which, oh, well, thank you for taking out the lights. Which is where people answer a micro survey before they get access to content. So again, we're trying to experiment with ways to get to a new business model, because I do believe the world has changed so much that we need to figure out what is going to be sustainable for the future, rather than harken back to the past and say, I wish it was like that before. And that, like I said at the end of my speech, and I'm sorry if that was a bit downbeat, but that is hard. And there's no magic bullet, right? As I said, we need to do, there was a publisher I met in the US called Jim Brady, and he said, there's no magic bullet. No, he said, there's no silver bullet. There's just silver shrapnel. We need to do lots of little things. And we were talking at dinner last night about how there needs to be an increasing diversification of revenue models in digital, right? And how do you work on that? Everything from events to memberships to clubs. And I was talking to a publisher in Sweden, and they created a membership club around insomnia. So I hope that translated okay. And the reason they did this is that they found that at about 1 o'clock, they were looking at their statistics of their traffic, and they found that at about 1 o'clock in the morning, there was a peak. And they thought, who is looking at our website at 1 o'clock in the morning? This seems strange. And what they realized is there was this small community of people that couldn't sleep. And so they did a brainstorming session. They said, okay, well, we have this community. What can we do? And they created a membership community where people paid to be part of it to try to deal with this problem. And it all came from someone looking at a little blip in that. And I'm not saying that's going to solve all their business model problems, but that's an example of diversification, clever diversification of revenue, about understanding how people and users are interacting with your product. And I think we just need more and more of it.
Seguimos por acá.
Yes, hello, Ernesto, Argentina, Diario El Día, La Plata. We found your presentation very interesting, but the examples of all the companies you work with were big national newspapers or newspapers from capital cities. What's the effort with regional newspapers?
That's a great question, because I think, honestly, Google hasn't been good enough in the regional and local area. And it's one of the things that, and I should have, sorry, I tried to cut things for speed in my speech, because I was interested in the questions and answers, because I think that's much more interesting. But one of the things that we're doing under GNI is much more around local. And so, for example, the G Suite program that I talked about, which is about free G Suite licenses, is targeted to smaller local and regional publishers. And we very much want to have a better dialogue with them. So I'll give you an example from my experience in Europe. When we started DNI 3 years ago, we got this feedback, and we had an annual event about some of the things that we were doing. And one of the local publishers came up to me afterwards, and he said, hey, would you mind if we created a little group of ourselves? Because I was just chatting with, he was a publisher based in the UK. He said, I was just chatting with someone from Sweden and someone from Portugal, and I realized we all have the same problems as local publishers, right? And I heard about something very interesting. And I think there's something that we can do. We obviously want to do things on the product side and on the partnership side, but I think there's also something we can do on the convening side and the knowledge sharing side. So like I said, I don't have all those answers, but I'd love to talk to you afterwards about what you think we should be doing, because personally I think we should be doing more.
Por ahí.
Sí, buenos días, Nuria Piera, de República Dominicana. Me gustaría saber si usted estuvo aquí en el salón cuando se estaba discutiendo la declaración digital de la CIP.
I was, yes.
¿Qué le parece?
Tiempo.
I think it was definitely a lively debate. I think, being seriously, I think we're honored to be part of that overall debate. I don't think it's our position to say it should be this or that. We're very much happy to be part of the conversation, and if you have specific questions that we can help and do that, we're very much willing to do that. But this is your declaration, and we wouldn't want to presume on anything about that.
¿Alguna pregunta más? No vi otras manos. Bueno, Le agradecemos entonces a Madhav por su participación y su presencia hoy en la asamblea. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias también al equipo, como el señaló, al equipo local de Google.